Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. This video is a session report of issue number 5 of the Sentinels of Justice, which is that superhero game that I've been running using Champions Now, which is the superhero game written by Ron Edwards and published by Hero Games. Now, before I jump into the play report, I should say a few things. It's been a while. It's been well over a month, maybe a month and a half or so since I published a video. And the reason for that is that I went on a spring break trip with the school where I teach, chaperoning kids to Greece. It was fantastic. We were there for 10 days, but it was exhausting and it put me back on all sorts of prep. And then I dove back into teaching the school year, and I've been trying to catch up and I've been exhausted, and we're coming up to finals, and it's just that time of year. So I've been occupied. Fortunately, things are starting to wind down, and so I should be able to get back to a weekly, posting schedule very soon, if not right now. So hopefully next week I'll also be able to post videos. What do we have coming up in terms of those videos? Well, I'm not 100% sure, but I think we might be able to play session 6 of Champions Now on Sunday. If not this Sunday, then maybe the Sunday after that. And so hopefully there'll be more of that coming to you soon. It looks like we're playing Shadow Dark the Gloaming today. So I'll be able to continue that, reporting on that campaign soon as well. But there was a big window there where we couldn't play Shadow Dark, which is what we've been playing regularly with the big group, because we couldn't get enough people at the table together. So I ended up playing in some games of Amazing Adventures that a friend of mine ran. But I also ran a game, some sessions in an entirely new game for me called White Hack. And so I will be giving my impressions of that relatively soon as well. We used White Hack to run an adventure published by Nerd Glows On Games, I think, called Mission Excalibur. So so those are the things that'll be coming down the pipe in the weeks to come, right? But anyway, now that I've caught you up as to why I've been absent and what's coming up, let's go ahead and dive into the play report for issue 5 of the Sentinels of Justice, but first a little bit of a recap. If you recall, in issue number 4 of the Sentinels of Justice, the heroes had tangled with Dr. Bellows, Dr. Prometheus Bellows. Dr. Bellows had transformed a woman by the name of Marva Wright into a rat person in the course of his experimentation. He had also transformed her friend, Peter Boggs, into a swamp monster. And the heroes had been tricked by Dr. Bellows to work with him in recapturing them, who had escaped from his laboratory. And they became very emotionally involved in that situation. Boggs was apparently killed by the heroes in the sewers, right? And Marva is the one who revealed to them that Dr. Bellows was indeed the enemy. They made a citizen's arrest of Dr. Bellows, and Justicar decided to escort Dr. Bellows, follow the police, and escort Dr. Bellows to prison to make sure that he got into a jail cell, or to the police department to make sure that he got into a jail cell. The other heroes went into the city, into the alleys of the city with Marva to try to figure out how to help her. Things didn't go according to plan. When Justicar got to the police station, he was brought up on suspicion of murder. There was a detective there, a particular detective there, who was suspicious of the Sentinels of Justice in general for the deaths of several silver shirts that had happened back in issue number 1, and they are indeed "quote unquote" guilty of those actions. So Justicar was arrested and put in a prison cell along with Dr. Bellows. The other heroes, in trying to figure out how to help Marva and in trying to figure out what to do about Justicar being in prison, got into kind of an argument. Marva slipped away. The heroes kind of debated their different sort of positions on justice and what was right and what was wrong and what they should do and all of that. And the session kind of ended with simply them not really being able to decide anything, and then time just wore out. I mean, they didn't really have evidence on Justicar, so they held him for 48 hours. They questioned him, and in the end, they let him go. They also let Dr. Bellows go initially because there was not enough evidence to hold him either. But Bellows got picked up by an FBI guy, so he's been kind of removed from the image. The last thing we saw in issue number 4 was Justicar transforming back into his alter ego, Dylan Pierce, Dr. Dylan Pierce, and having a conversation with his wife, who was very distraught over not being able to do anything about the fact that he was in prison. And she was at her wit's end. And on top of it all, on her way back from the prison earlier the night of Justicar's release, so before his release, but earlier that night, she had been followed home apparently by some men that tried to move in on her. And then a dark clad serpentine figure kind of emerged from the shadows and scared them off. And then that figure sort of reached out to her and she screamed because, creepy stranger, and he recoiled in pain or in anguish and disappeared into the shadows. And when Justicar came home that night, the two of them had a tense discussion about what this all means. And that is where we ended the session. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to pick up where we left off. Well, actually, what I am going to do is that I am going to read from a play report that I've written. I did that last time, and it seemed to work reasonably well. And as I read through this report, I'll pause at moments to kind of reflect on certain behind-the-scenes things that were going on, things that I might have done with the system or questions that I had or observations that I had about things. And by the way, let me begin with one of those. When we ended the last play report, I was worried about the social dynamics at the table. Only a little bit, but I mused on that in my last play report. And, I was worried that some of the discussion, the tense discussion that the characters are having, I was worried that some of that had gone into the realm of the personal, that the players were actually feeling frustrated with one another over the issues and maybe over the game. And I mused about the possibility of needing to have some sort of intervention, some sort of is everybody okay kind of moment. And I want to thank Ron Edwards when I shared that over at Adept Play, and he responded to my comments about that or to the video. He basically said bluntly, like, I don't think it's your place to be, having a session where everybody kind of gets along. Your players are adults. They can handle their own, relationships and their own emotions. They can work it out. It's not your job as game master to play that role. And your players are good, right? In fact, they're not just good. They seem, from your descriptions, great at this. So you should just trust them. And Ron was absolutely right. I should just trust them. I had reasons for my worry. A lot of those have to do just with me, and some of them have to do with previous play experiences. But in the end, Ron is right. I really did need to trust them. And I did. I had zero conversations about this with any of my players. And they came back to the table and they continued playing with memory of what had happened in the previous session. But, smoothly slipping back into the flow of play. And I think I'll have some more to say about that flow at the end of this video. But I wanted to thank Ron for that and make the observation that, I don't know, I'm trust your players, right? And I'm very grateful that I can play with players that I can trust. If I can't trust them, then why am I playing with them, right? But yeah, I have deep appreciation for the group that I play with, who I've been playing with them in many cases for 4 decades, right? And yeah, so it went well. Anyway, so now let's dive into the actual description of what happened in issue 5. The days following Justicar's release from prison were unsettling for the hero's alter ego, Dylan Pierce, as he wrestled with the implications of his wife Nadia's encounter with the men who attacked her and the dark clad, serpentine themed man who scared them away. Although Nadia awoke calm and ready to begin her first semester of graduate study after pouring out her worries and frustrations to Dylan the night before, Dylan knew that the Knights of Apophis had tracked her to New York, and his mind raced through all the options. Should they flee? Should they stay and fight? Should he bring someone into their lives to help him protect Nadia? For the moment, at least, he opted to keep the Sentinels of Justice in the dark about the situation, focusing instead on gauging Nadia's mood, right? So one thing about working with the hero sheets, the Knights of Apophis, they have not appeared in play yet, or they had not appeared in play yet until the last session. But they're here now, and this is pulled from Justicar's hero sheet. It is notable that they do not hunt Justicar, they hunt Nadia, right? So, so she is one of, the Knights of Apophis are one of her situations, and they're embedded in his situation, who is Nadia. The other thing I thought was interesting, it was, I've been enjoying watching Dan in very deliberative fashion, like balancing the degree to which Nadia interacts with or is aware of the Sentinels of Justice, and how much Justicar confides in the Sentinels of Justice. And he's an interesting person in the way that he keeps people at the edges, but tries to hold on to them still a little bit, right? And so I don't know, I just thought that was interesting. He didn't run straight to his teammates to tell them all about the situation. So let's continue. A few days later, Nadia came home excited that her professor, Dr. Franklin Hawthorne, hired her to translate Egyptian texts recently acquired by the university. Or maybe I shouldn't say hired. Maybe I should say, appointed her to that task or what have you. Concerned, Dylan asked if Hawthorne planned to credit her for the work. I don't see why not, she replied in a defensive tone. Noticing her upset, Dylan shifted his approach. I didn't mean to be negative, he said. I just want to make sure that the world appreciates your brilliance as much as I do. Noticing her soften, Dylan continued, one more thing. Promise me that your work won't come in the way of our lunches together. We'll see, she replied with a teasing glance. So, I also enjoyed this exchange for a few reasons. First of all, I'm finding it easier to play Nadia now, right? Because initially, in the first 4 issues, she was just, until the 4th, in the first 3 issues, she was just the supportive wife. And it seemed to me, the more that the issues ticked on, the more that she was just saying, it's all right, dear, it's all right, of course, everything is fine. Now, even in those interactions back then, I felt like that wasn't true. Like she was kind of putting up a front, a face. She was doing her best to be supportive of somebody that was exhibiting extreme behavior and it was an extreme situation, but she loved them anyway. But I had not found a moment to kind of like, for her to kind of assert herself and her needs. And that presented itself in the previous one. And now playing her for the first time after issue 4, I found that, she has a little bit more of a personality, a little bit more to claim for herself. And I thought Dan did a really good job of like noticing that and then trying to navigate it. It's all, I think, relatively subtle in terms of some of the stuff that's going on, or at least not explosive, right? It's within the realms of regular, naturalistic kind of like, social banter. But it was very enjoyable and for me. And I also liked that Dan brought back this notion that the lunches they have together are a particularly special thing in their relationship, right? Like when we haven't scripted that, it's not written down anywhere, but in session number 1, they did have a nice lunch in the park where they laughed and they talked and they shared and they gave, she gave him advice and all of that. And it was cool to see Dan kind of like bring back the memory back into this session. And it's kind of established now, I think, based on this interaction, that this is something that they regularly do. And I enjoyed Nadia being able to say, even if kind of playfully, but with a little bit of an edge, maybe being able to say, we'll see if that gets interrupted or not, right? I've got things to do too, right? So that session, or that not session, that interaction wrapped up, I thought, in kind of a fun way. Now I want to say, like, these interactions, what I've done is basically to write what I'm reading right now. I've clipped a few choice lines and placed them into a prose that summarizes an interaction that was more robust than what I'm reading here. Of course, I'm just trying to give the essential meaning of the scenes that we played, but these were far more robust interactions, all of these that I'm reading. All right, so let's move on. Different hero. For her part, Eliza Goodwin, aka Spitfire, returned to the set of Jumbo, where the cast met Jimmy Durante, who was recently cast as the show's ringmaster. As the show began coming together in earnest with rehearsals, the introduction of animal acts, and all the other excitement that attends a production of its kind, Eliza also made time to meet her brother, Dustin, for dinner and an automat near the Hippodrome Theater. Throughout dinner, he displayed his displeasure with big city life while dropping hints that Eliza should return to Texas and settle down. Maybe with her brother's friend Bertie, who'd always had eyes for and recently inquired about her. He relented when Eliza evaded these suggestions, but said he'd probably be in town for a while as he pursued new opportunities. So this is just deepening some of the interactions these characters have already had. He now that that in issue number 1 they talked, but Silver Spectre kind of inserted herself into, or Helena Geller kind of inserted herself into the conversation. So he wasn't really able to kind of like really strongly suggest that she leave New York. But here he had his shot and he made it. He doesn't like his sister being in this environment. He doesn't like this environment. He made that clear. And Spitfire ain't budging, right? She ain't budging. So anyway, there was that. Again, it was more robust than what I just read, but that was the essence of that interaction. Over in Brooklyn, Major Shocker approached Ned Cross, his trainer, for help finding Marva Wright's children, Elijah and Cece, and her brother, Harold. Since Marva lost track of them in Harlem, the hero asked Ned to use his connections in Harlem's boxing world to see if anybody knew anything about their whereabouts. Now, this is a function of something actually that happened in session 4. Major Shocker said, I would like to make a detective work role to try to find Marva's, people. And he also suggested that he would do that through Ned Cross. So he didn't just give me he gave me the avenue that he would try to pursue. And then he also asked for the role. And we made the role, and it was successful. So I rolled randomly at the time to see how long it would take for this to pan out, and I came up with a number. All right. This is important because, as you'll see in a moment, Helena Geller, or I should say, Silver Spectre, also asked for a detective work role for a different thing. She was trying to find Dr. Bellows's lab. In her case, she didn't give me like a direct avenue of inquiry. She just said, I would like to use my detective skills to try to find out the lab. We made the roll, and it also proved successful. I then randomly rolled to see how many days that would pan out. And as it turns out, her investigation panned out more quickly than Major Shocker's investigation. So that's the order that we're going to end up resolving those roles in. It makes sense given the situation that would have been the case, but we left it up to chance, and that is the way that it worked out. So he's still waiting for results at this point. As he awaited results, Major Shocker resumed life as Brett Bolton, working at the family business and keeping touch with his neighbors. One day, when returning from visiting with Dr. Zapp, Brett noticed a commotion at his parents' home. Rushing to see what was wrong, Brett found his mother upset that his father had gotten into an altercation with a neighborhood tough who attempted to extort protection money from a friend's business. "Why'd you do it?" asked Brett, turning to his father, who held a stake to his swollen and bleeding brow. "Because he probably works for that new outfit moving into town, son. The one who probably had you shot a few days ago. I won't have it. If Major Shocker taught us anything when he pushed Luciano's boys out of the neighborhood, it's to stand up for ourselves. Yeah, he slugged me, but I gave him as good as I got, and that good-for-nothing ran off." After verifying that his dad was all right, Brett dropped the issue, but privately worried about a mob reprisal. Now, there is stuff going on here, also going back to issue number 1. First, there has been word of a new outfit moving into the region, right? Into the neighborhood. So that is lingering there. But the new outfit and Luciano's boys are not the ones that shot Brett. It was the Silver Shirts in issue number 1, and specifically the Silver Ranger, their leader, who shot Major Shocker, who is Brett Bolton, during their encounter. And the whole notion that it was maybe somebody associated with the mob who shot Brett was something that Uncle Frank, who helps Brett cover for his activities as Major Shocker, was something that he and Ned and Zapp kind of concocted as a way of explaining why Brett had a bullet wound to the upper chest, right? So that is kind of that lie coming back, because when the dad heard that explanation, he became very concerned about this new outfit being here and very concerned about that. And so this is part of the consequence of that interaction, right? So I don't know. We'll see where it goes, but maybe it, well, no. I mean, we'll see where it goes. I don't know where it's going to go. I have some situations set up, but I don't know how they're going to get triggered, or if they're going to get triggered, or whatever. It depends on stuff. All right, and then we do a little character stuff with Silver Spectre. So here we go. Meanwhile, Helena Geller, a.k.a. Silver Spectre, set out to balance her reporting for the Daily Eagle with her investigating the whereabouts of Dr. Bellows' laboratory. Her reporting efforts met with limited success. Daily Eagle editor Ed Brandt pushed back against the piece she wrote in response to Flint Sims's recent attacks on the Sentinels of Justice, charging that her defense of vigilante justice seemed more emotional and hyperbolic than analytical and reasoned. However, Brandt lauded her reporting on the threat the Silver Legion posed to American democracy and encouraged her to delve deeper into that angle. Also, he said, "Don't let Flint Sims get in your head." "Right, boss," Helena said. "I won't let you down." Okay, so a few things about this scene. This is the first time we meet Ed Brandt. I will admit, to have him be essentially played by Ed Asner and be inspired by Lou Grant, can't help it. I've been, last summer I started rewatching the Mary Tyler Moore Show, just because I had vague memories of it as a kid, and I also watched the first season of Lou Grant's, drama about him coming back to work in newspapers. And so, I don't know, I like Ed Asner, so we brought him into this as a character, as an actor for Ed Brandt. And I thought that Helena would kind of give him some guff about like him challenging her story a little bit. But she didn't. She kind of said, "Right, boss." She kind of deferred to him, and I thought that was cool. I mean, again, I don't know if this is going to go much more than the surface level, but I thought that was interesting because I kind of she's a little more hard nosed usually, and I guess I expected something else. I'm not upset that I didn't get something else. I thought that this was interesting, and I'm curious to see if their relationship will or how their relationship will evolve. Let me muse for a second on how it is that I decided that Ed Brandt would push back against her story. Um, I asked Lauren, Helena's player, like, how is Helena going to respond to Flint Sims's reporting? If you recall, Flint Sims is a rival reporter who had taken a more negative, posture towards the Sentinels of Justice. And Lauren had said that Helena would be responding directly to that. So I said, fair enough. How? What does she say? And Lauren said, I'm going to say that the Sentinels of Justice basically saved the city. And then I'm going to defend their method of dispensing justice, which is controversial. Like I think for the paper to say, yay, like vigilante justice is all right with us. I don't know. I felt like, maybe that might require a role of some sort to get it through editorial, right? So that's what we did. We had her make a presence attack. She didn't roll well. Ed Brandt rolled well, and so she didn't get it. And so then, based on the description she gave me, I decided to seize on the fact that the Sentinels of Justice didn't really save the city per se. It's not like you had one of these situations where the water supply was going to be, tainted with poison, or a bomb was going to destroy the city or something like that. They very specifically stopped a heist of weapons that could have been used for nefarious purposes. But to say that they saved the city is a little hyperbolic, right? So I decided to seize on that and have Ed Brandt push back on those grounds. And then just based on Helena's expressed dislike for Flint Sims, I felt like it's reasonable to say that at least Brandt would perceive that Sims has gotten into her head in ways that are making her less than precise in terms of her job. And, yeah. And so that's how I decided that. By the way, I'm going to circle back to the beginning of the session because I was tempted to make a presence attack or have Justicar make a presence attack roll, or Dylan Pierce make a presence attack roll to interact with Nadia. But then I remembered that she's a DMPC. He does not get to make presence attacks against her. She's immune to his presence attacks. So for that interaction, I just left it up to how I was feeling in the moment, in terms of what they'd just been through and what he was saying, how she might respond. So no rolls there. That was just us riffing off of each other. Here, it was guided by a roll. Okay? All right, so let's move on to Helena Geller's other endeavors here. Okay, so Helena met with more success in her efforts to find Dr. Bellows' laboratory. Delving back into the sewers, she took samples from Pete Boggs' headless body and began researching the flora she lifted from the decomposing mound. 5 days later, Helena found a slim volume in the New York Public Library's main branch, providing detailed descriptions and images of local flora. Using this book, she discovered that one of the samples she'd taken only grew in New Jersey's Great Swamp. Coming out of the library, Helena activated her risk communicator and contacted the rest of the team. I found the lab, she said. When do we leave? All right. Moving on. The team immediately set about making preparations. Although hesitant to leave Nadia, the Great Swamp's proximity to Manhattan, it's only like 26 miles away, and the fact that Nadia would be busy working on translations at the university led Dylan to conclude that Justicar could join the others on the mission. For his part, Brett borrowed a delivery truck from his family business under the pretense that he had to help a friend move a dining set. Then, consulting a map, the heroes noted all of the towns on the periphery of the swamp. Perusing the list of townships, Helena realized that one of them, Harding, was prominently featured in Evelyn Wilder's Wilderness Wonders, Observations in the Great Swamp of New Jersey, which was the volume that she had used to pinpoint the lab to the Great Swamp. Armed with that information, the heroes drove to Harding. They stopped at the outskirts of town, where Justicar and Spitfire took to the skies to conduct an aerial overview of the Great Swamp, while Brett and Helena continued to Harding to ask questions of the locals. All right. And all of that, the most of the details of how they went about the investigation of where in the Great Swamp to find the lab was stuff that they contributed, right? They told me that they were going to be looking for towns around the swamp. They were asking about, roads and, railroad tracks and all of that. So they did that. The thing that I did provide was, again, Lauren hadn't told me precisely how it was that she was going to try to find Dr. Bellows' lab. She just said, I want Silver Spectre to use her detective work role to figure that out. And so I supplied the possibility of her having gone into the sewers and extracted that plant material and then figuring it out from there. And she said, yeah, that sounds cool. So we went with it, right? But anyway, there they are. They're going on the swamp, and we have a couple of heroes doing a little recon here. So let's see how that went. Focusing his search on the swamp areas nearest to Harding, Justicar noticed a camp in a clearing. Although flying too high to discern many details, he could see several people socializing around the campfire. However, the people noticed Justicar before he could close the distance, and they quickly fled into the surrounding environment. Spitfire had similar luck. Scouting areas further from the town than Justicar, she noticed a circular patch of swamp with a darker hue than its surroundings, suggesting greater depth. Spitfire also saw what looked like a black bear walking the periphery of the patch. Then, the four-legged beast stood up on its hind legs and, comfortably bipedal, ambled into the surrounding foliage while letting off a mournful, bear-like roar. So, okay, so how did I handle this? This speaks a little bit to my prep for this session. They said they wanted to do some reconnaissance. There was a reasonable chance that they would see something. And the reason there was a reasonable chance that they would see something is because actually maybe I over-prepped for this session. I'd never intended to bring my characters or the characters to this swamp. I knew from backstory that Bellows had a lab. I knew it was in the Great Swamp. But I didn't, and we had also established that he had been conducting experiments and that he had created other animal human hybrid mutations, right? Like that had already been established. At the very least, he'd created more rat people, because when Justicar read, had Ma'at search the truth of Bellows's thoughts, he was like, she discovered that he didn't care about Marva because he already created a bunch of rat people, but he was really interested in Boggs because Boggs was like a new creation, right? So we'd already established that. So when the heroes turned this up, I suddenly started thinking, well, what happened in that swamp? What is the situation in that swamp? So now that the swamp gets pulled from the backstory or from the background into a situation, and I started like building it out. And I think I built it out too much, right? Like, I was like, oh, he could have done this, he could have done that, he could have done the other, and that led to a lot of different individuals and groups that suddenly I had to keep track of. And I made hero sheets or villain sheets for all of these, or most of these, and they were all potential encounters, but I didn't know whether or not the heroes were going to encounter them, or it just depended on what they did. I knew that they were going to most likely encounter what they'll encounter later in this issue, but beyond that, I didn't know. Even then I didn't really know. I thought, because they were looking for the lab, I knew what was in the lab. Let's put it that way. So if they were going to go to the lab, they were probably going to find this. So I made a little kind of random encounter table for myself with all the other possible things that they could run across. And I had that kind of off to the side. So when these characters said we're going to be doing recon in two separate areas, I said, okay, make a perception roll. They did, and they were both successful. And then I rolled on my random encounter table to see what they spotted. And they spotted the individuals around this camp, although they don't know who they are because they didn't close distance, or Justicar didn't close distance, and they spotted this bear-like figure, which again, Spitfire didn't get closer. They could have, right? Like both characters could have dove down solo to investigate their respective findings. They chose not to. Had they, this session could have gone in a completely different way. They might not have gone to the lab, at least not at first, right? So, and it's very likely that they have pursued any of these other angles, that they, even if they arrived at the lab, they would have arrived at the lab in a very different way than they ultimately did. So, that's just to share a little bit of my process and my, I don't feel like I needed to create those little tables for myself, but I like the bounce that those tables provide. It makes it fun for me to not be entirely sure of what elements are going to be in play. Okay. So, all right. While those guys were doing that, here we go. Meanwhile, Helena and Brett entered a Harding and went to a local diner. Brett consulted the yellow pages and found a few companies Dr. Bellows might have used to order equipment, while Helena conversed with Betty, one of the waitresses. As luck would have it, Betty knew a retired professor, Dr. Daedalus, who often came into town to regale the locals with fabulous stories. Some might find him annoying, she said, but I think he's very sophisticated. Realizing that this was probably Dr. Bellows using a different name, Helena and Brett asked Betty about Dr. Daedalus's whereabouts. Betty pointed them to an old farmhouse on the edge of town. Sadly, she reported, Dr. Daedalus hasn't been around for a while, so you might not have much luck. As Brett and Helena left the diner to contact their teammates, a stranger warned them of happenings near the swamp, including eerie sounds, missing animals, and stolen equipment. All right, so we're almost towards the end here. After reconvening on the outskirts of town and suiting up, the Sentinels of Justice drove their delivery truck to the address Betty had provided. There, they found an abandoned farmhouse and barn, relatively well maintained, but for the long grass and weeds that had begun reclaiming the grounds. Splitting up, Silver Spectre and Spitfire headed for the farmhouse's front door, while Major Shocker and Justicar moved towards the barn. Okay, and this is the point where we're going to switch gears and take us to the map. All right, so give me a second to pull that off. All right, there we go. Okay, so yeah, as you have probably figured out by now, this is the moment where the combat starts in the game, right? So, okay, so when they got to the farm that Betty had pointed them to, they pulled up the delivery van, and the delivery van is not this truck that you see here. They pulled it up further back off the map, and they walked towards the farm. And I said, well, what do you guys do? First of all, this map here is not entirely accurate. I said this is not a working farm. So imagine that the grounds are overrun. Imagine that there are no animals walking around or anything like that. No domesticated animals walking around or anything like that. But the buildings are there. They're intact. They're not like falling apart or in ruins or dilapidated or anything, but they, the grounds are a little bit unkempt. And what do? The barn is up here to the north where I'm pinging. I hope you can see that. And then, of course, the bigger building that's more obvious is the farmhouse. So they scanned the area looking for things. I think Silver Spectre and Major Shocker are asked to make detective work rolls. And in the moment I said, yeah, go ahead, I think I should have had that be a perception roll instead. Same difference in terms of what they actually rolled, but it just occurs to me that's not what detective work is for, right? A perception roll would have been fine, but they failed. They failed their rolls. So they didn't notice anything untoward. And I said, what do you do? And this is what happened. They split up. Silver Spectre and Spitfire. Whoops. Hold on. Why is this not? Okay, hold on. Let me get my. Okay, I think. Okay. Okay, yeah, there we go. I think that's right. So Silver Spectre and Spitfire went to the front door to knock on the door. Right? Perfectly respectable citizens knocking on a front door before they barge in. That's fine. Justicar gave a powerful, you know, uh, uh, bat of his wings and kind of flew up and back down over near the barn. He was going to go check out the barn. And Major Shocker decided to go along with Justicar and walk towards the barn. And he has a, slower movement, right? So the moment that the heroes got to the positions I've designated on the map, segment 1 began. And it began with the activation of a couple of hazards. Here we go. Unfortunately, the heroes' advance activated the house's defense systems. When Silver Spectre and Spitfire stepped on the farmhouse's welcome mat, electricity arced through them. Simultaneously, nozzles popped up from the front yard, spraying Major Shocker with sleep gas. Fortunately, Silver Spectre maintained enough control of her body, in other words, she wasn't stunned, so that she was able to move herself and the stunned Spitfire off of the electrified mat, right? That became Silver Spectre's phase action, phase 1 action. She acts on segment 1. So that was her phase 1 action. Also, fortunately for Major Shocker, Justicar had avoided the sleep gas because he had flown up and over, right? So Justicar looked back, saw what was happening to his teammate, held his breath, and then dove into the sleep gas to pull his friend out. So he dove in, holding his breath, grabbed Major Shocker, gave a powerful beat of his wings, and shot straight up out. We imagine the wings like sending the gas kind of roiling away and out from his location, right? And I want to stress that the ability to do that is strictly from the special effects of the gas, right? It's damage to anybody that goes in, but because it's a sleep gas, the fact that he's holding his breath because he sees it ahead of time means that this is a doable action as long as he doesn't linger in it and have a hard time holding his breath and all that. So he shoots straight up, and all of that is happening on segment 2. I should say that both Major Shocker and Spitfire were stunned by the respective hazards against them, right? So this move by Justicar and Silver Spectre to pull them out of harm's way was really, really important to the way the session unfolded. Now, unfortunately for Justicar, also on phase 2, there was another person on the scene who had been holding their action since phase 1. And that was the master of the house, or at least the person who has been watching over the house and Bellows is absent. And it is a man-ape. He's basically a chimpanzee-human hybrid who's wearing a corduroy hunting outfit with pockets and stuff. I went and looked up hunting outfits from the 1930s and found this kind of bougie corduroy outfit. I was like, that's ridiculous. So we went ahead and gave it to him. And he's wielding a grapple gun, or a grenade launcher / grapple gun handheld that, of course is probably Bellows's design. And he has 4 speed. So he'd been waiting since he'd been holding his action since segment 1. So he's now taking that held action on segment 2. And when Justicar shot straight up out of the sleeping gas, Simeon, who is this character, leveled his gun and shot at Justicar and launched a bola at him. And the bola flew through the air, wrapped around Justicar, and electrocuted him. Now, again, because special effects, okay? Because of the situation, since Justicar's holding Major Shocker, this is not an area effect attack, but when it wrapped around, it just makes sense that it would have wrapped around Major Shocker as well. The electricity arced through both of their bodies. It knocked Major Shocker unconscious. He had already been, rendered drowsy by the sleep gas. Now he's unconscious. And Justicar is not stunned by the attack. He's a pretty beefy and buff guy, or tough guy. But also special effects. The bolas interrupt his ability to fly, right? And so he starts to fall. Dan asks, can Justicar make some sort of roll to be able to kind of twist his body in the air as he's flying? He was trying to do two things. He was trying to make sure that he landed first so he can take the brunt of the fall for Major Shocker. He also wanted to get a look at who had attacked him. I think I had him make a dex roll to do the twist in the air, and he did indeed see Simeon like grinning at him with kind of like a vicious smile and loading another cartridge into his grapple gun. And with that, Justicar falls to the ground. So I think that was the end of segment. Hold on a second. Let me make sure I have this right. Yeah, that was the end of segment 2. The only other things that I should say about segment 2 was that Spitfire, who acts on segment 2, recovered from being stunned that round, so she's kind of shaking off the effects. But other than that, that's what happened. So now we're on segment 3. Simeon goes first in segment 3, and he decides to hold his action. I mean, he can't see any of the other targets from his vantage point on top of the house. He, he's already knocked out one of the heroes. The other one is all wrapped up, and so we're going to see how that proceeds. He's going to hold his action to see if he needs to, if something else presents itself. And it does, because Silver Spectre, who at this point is sure that Spitfire is okay, runs out into the yard to get a look at who attacked Justicar, and sees Simeon up on the roof. And with that, she moves to tag him with her time stop power, right? So she motions towards him. Simeon sees the attack, decides to take his held action and to do a full acrobatic move. So he leaps into the air, kicking up tiles right from the roof as he does. And Silver Spectre tags where the tiles are, and they freeze in the air in that black and white motif that they do when she uses her powers. But Simeon is not there to be frozen along with the tiles, and he lands near her in front of the house, right? And he takes in the whole situation. But that was a full move action for him. So Silver Spectre, and that was it for segment 3. So now we're on segment 4, a fully recovered Spitfire runs up to Simeon and tries to tag him with a firebolt. Again, he's got the benefit from the acrobatics. He's really hard to hit. She's pretty good with she has a high dex. Her dex kind of matches him, but he's got just the edge because of his acrobatic move. And so she rolls and she misses that shot. This is segment 4. On segment 4, Major Shocker, Justicar's fallen. Major Shocker, didn't take any more damage from the fall. They weren't that high up anyway. And Justicar had cushioned the blow anyway by taking the brunt of that fall. And, Justicar is looking at the situation unfold, and he's thinking, I've got to get in there. He can sense that Major Shocker's coming, regaining consciousness, because, champions now, anybody who loses consciousness gets one opportunity to come back from that. And then the second time they're knocked unconscious, they're out until, for the foreseeable future. But Major Shocker is recovering from being unconscious. Justicar is like, I got to get in there. So Dan says, okay, Justicar's going to push his strength to try to bust out of this entangle, right? Out of this bola. And it was a great roll. So it was very dramatic. Like, he snapped he snapped the bolas. He's like, "Are you all right?" to Major Shocker. Major Shocker's kind of like nodding his head. And then Justicar stands up and pulls out the Mace of Ma'at ready for action. But that was his full action that round. So now we are on segment 5, and it's Simeon's go. And he decides to go on the offensive. So Simeon ends up doing kind of like, one of these two-fisted kind of kicks. He kind of cartwheels through the air, comes down with like a two-fisted kick, kind of like the Beast from the X-Men coming straight for Helena. Helena tries to martial block, but he rolls really well, gets past her defenses, and slams into her with both feet, rolled really well, and just knocked her unconscious, right? So he lands over her, and then he whirls around and kind of does a threat display to try to throw everybody off their game. In other words, a presence attack. He gets a bonus. He has bonus presence only for threat displays. So, but he's in combat. So, although he does manage to hit some of them with the bare minimum effect, so I guess in that sense it was minimally successful. It actually didn't change the presence attack didn't change the order of combat in his favor, given the circumstances. But he took out Silver Spectre, and at that point, he's scanning around for his next. Oops, hold on. What happened to my? There we go. Sorry, I hit the wrong thing. So he's scanning for his next, target. So we are now on to segment 6, right? And Simeon is again on the offensive. He does he runs and tumbles over towards Spitfire, and he kind of like runs, tumbles, jumps in the air, and he's gonna come down with like a two-handed like wallop on top of Spitfire, basically going for a martial punch attack on her. And he doesn't roll well. He'd been doing pretty well the whole fight, but he messed up. He rolled like a 13 or so, which wasn't enough to tag Spitfire. So he comes down with a wallop. She sidesteps, kind of ducking low, and fires a flame bolt at him, which catches him like in the gut as he's coming down, and sends him flying back quite a distance away from her. Didn't do enough damage to stun him, but he did take like 10 knockout and flew back, right? So he lands in an acrobatic crouch and kind of sneers at everybody. But unfortunately for him, the combat was about to come to an end, because Justicar, who's now ready for action, flew over there on segment 6, lands in front of him with the Mace of Ma'at, and went to martial punch him. But the Mace of Ma'at hit hard with a martial punch, and it has like a severe effect that, where some knockout gets through regular defenses if when he hits. So his chances to hit Simeon were not great. He'd moved before he attacked. Simeon has a really high defensive value, but Justicar rolled like a 7, connected, and just walloped him. It was a great roll. He aimed him towards this old beat up truck that was parked over here, and so Simeon flies back and gets embedded in the truck. The truck door just bends the metal of the door. He just gets embedded in there. And Major Shocker, who was on the heels of Justicar's action, moves up and uses his magnetic glove to pull Simeon's gun, grapple gun, which was like, just slipping out of Simeon's now, limp hand, right? Limp arm, right? Because he was unconscious, right? He just pulled it and ended up with it in his hand. And with that, Helena or Silver Spectre was starting to come out of her unconsciousness, and the characters just kind of converged on the now unconscious Simeon, just kind of looking around and wondering what the heck else this farm had to throw at them, right? So that's where we ended session 5, or issue number 5 of the Sentinels of Justice. Now, let me go ahead and give a few reflections on the session. Where do I want to begin? First, I gotta say, I love the pace that this campaign has, and I think, this is in the old days, and in fact, most times that we role play for longer. I mean, it's shortened ever since we've been playing online, since the pandemic and all of that, and since life situations has pulled our age-old group to different corners of the world, and it's just harder to sit in front of a computer. So, but even so, our typical gaming session will run between 3 to 5 hours, right? That's kind of what we do these days. In the old days, it would be 5 to 6 to 7 hours, and we might even do another game after that. And, we do, like, it'd be a very different situation, these much more large, kind of sprawling things. Champions now, because we're running it on a Sunday, and we don't have much, it's on an off game day, and we don't have that much time, we're committing to 2-hour sessions, 2.5-hour sessions. That's what we're doing. And it's been nice because it fits. It feels like each one of these stories that we do, or not stories, but each one of these sessions that we play does seem like it would fit in a, traditional comic book, right? It feels about the same length. And some of that is just the constraint of the amount of time that we have to play, and maybe some of that is the way that I choose to pace sort of the interactions, the naturalistic kind of, like, vignettes that we have with each of the characters and all of that, right? So maybe it's that I have an internal sense of how a superhero comic unfolds in terms of the pace, but it's not just that. The system itself helps so much. It helps because the situations that are on the hero sheets present you with those, they kind of like give you the raw material and kind of the stage for the vignettes that are the naturalistic moments. Like, where you're going with those. They're easy to structure because the hero sheet makes it easy to structure, and the villain sheets make them easy to structure. And then there's just something about the pace of combat. The pace of combat, the game plays at a really, really nice clip. It just does. This combat lasted for 6 segments. I don't think I've had an encounter or a combat that has lasted for more than 6 segments, except for the very first issue, which is the only time in this game where we've had the hero team face off against a villain team, right? So there was an equal number of villains and an equal number of heroes. And that ran for almost 12 segments, right? Or 2 turns of combat, right? And yet, despite the fact that these battles are short, they are consequential. They are packed with interesting moments that are I don't know, you could see them as panels. And also they are chunky, right? They have, gosh, I'm not articulating this well at all, obviously, but they are robust, but have room for the unexpected to happen. Like, you never get the sense that a villain is totally vulnerable or totally secure. You never get the sense that the heroes are totally vulnerable or totally secure. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. In the last 2 combats that we've had in this game, it was Marva versus 4 Sentinels of Justice. You can predict that Marva's going to lose that fight. She's just outnumbered. And yet, in the playing of it, she got some really good shots in on Justicar. She was probably like one round away from taking Justicar out. If the other players had not gotten involved, she could well have won that one-on-one with Justicar. And when everybody else got involved, she held her own for a few. She didn't feel like a pushover. There wasn't just this bap, you're gone. I mean, in the end, there was a time stop, you're frozen. But, people walked away from Marva like, okay. They didn't, like her ability should be respected, right? Even more so today. I mean, it was just Simeon against all the Sentinels of Justice. He had the advantage of having a few hazards working in his for him. But he exploited the situation just enough, just a little bit, to he could have taken out 3 heroes, right? I mean, he did take out Major Shocker. He did take out Silver Spectre. Had he tagged Spitfire with that last roll, he probably would have knocked her unconscious. She was already depleted from the electrified mat, right? So we're talking about a situation where then it would have been one-on-one with Justicar until the others could maybe recover their consciousness, but even then they'd have low endurance and all of that. So it's just, I don't know. It feels like you can craft villains that feel consequential, and the players don't have to feel like, oh gosh, the GM tanked that hero up so that he'd be a challenge, and now we have to sit here for God knows how long, just kind of slogging through the impossibly high defenses, and right? Like, it doesn't feel like that. And it also doesn't feel like you can just wave your hand and villains are gone. So I just really appreciate it, and these are qualities that have been enhanced in this version of the game, right? Like I think, the first 3 editions of Champions had some of this. In fact, a lot of this, to be honest, but it's been tightened up and polished up so it could shine more in this version of the game. And 4th edition and Hero and up lost a lot of that. I mean, and that's not to say that those are bad games. I played those games. I enjoyed those games for a while, at least 4th edition, for a long time. They're their own experience, but I think that's the point. They're their own experience. This is not Hero System. This is Champions, and it's Champions now, very specifically. It's its own thing, and it's a thing that I love. It's just been so much fun. And then, I always like to reflect on things that I can improve on. And, I think I need. Okay. So there's one in-play thing that I messed up because I had not prepped my combat tracker as carefully as I usually do. I was a little haphazard about my prep that day for reasons. And my hazards disappeared. I mean, the mat should have disappeared, because if you're not stepping on it, it's not active. But really, that sleep gas, it should have been active maybe for a little longer. And I'm not mad about how things turned up. People ended up fighting in the area where that sleep gas would be. We can assume that Justicar's wings dispersed, diffused it enough that it didn't have play. But that's just me kind of justifying something that I forgot. Really, that sleep gas should have lingered for a while longer. And so that's just a note to me to be able to track hazards a little more carefully. And then in terms of my preparation for this event, I think I over prepared this part of the world. And in doing so, I created so much material which may never see the light of day. And it's okay if it doesn't. I don't need it to by any stretch. And it'll still be around, and so maybe someday it'll pop up again. But I created so much material that I feel like I didn't focus in enough on like developing, for instance, Simeon's villain sheet doesn't pop as much as like some of the other villain sheets that I have. So he seems a little bit more pro forma. But you know what? I think sometimes that's okay. He's good enough to play. Now that I've played him, I might know him a little better. And when I go back and look at the sheet again, I'll be able to refine it. So not really a mistake, but just an observation on what might happen when you don't have the time to fully prepare, or you're not inspired enough to fully prepare. Maybe just throw something basic together and just run with it, and it'll develop kind of on its own through play, right? And oh, there's one more thing that I want to say, and this is kind of cycling back to some of the stuff that I was talking about at the beginning, right? About trusting my players and just letting them come to the table, and they came to the table with a memory of all the tensions that had happened in the previous session, but with an eye towards playing this session and moving forward. And that, I don't know. Again, is this a system? Is this us as players? It's probably both. But I really appreciate the way that this issue, in a lot of ways, brings the heat down. Right? You had some super tension or some emotionally powerful moments in issue 1, issue 2, issue 3, issue 4, and then this issue seems a little bit like a filler issue. And so often when we talk about TV shows, for example, we're like, oh, that was a filler episode, therefore it's a bad episode. I only care about the episodes where like the lore is, revealed, or the plot is furthered. And the thing is that, I don't know. I've never really liked that line of thinking, because I actually sometimes really prefer the filler episodes, even in TV shows. But in something like this, like I appreciated that, it's like, you read an issue of a comic book, you're like, whoa, that's heavy. You wait a month, you buy the next issue of the comic, and maybe you'll see a panel with the character kind of grumbling about what happened in the last issue with the other character, but a situation presents itself, and although there's still that thing is still in the air, you're focusing on this new situation, and you're basically, going along as a team. And it's just a way of like, I don't know, it brings down the tension, and that might go on for a little while, who knows for how long, until it rises up again for some reason. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But that this issue of the Sentinels of Justice seemed like let's take a break and just have fun fighting a lab monkey, kind of thing. And again, it's not that the characters didn't have some things to wrestle with a little bit or worry about a little bit, but the heat between them has calmed down. And again, I think something about the way you're supposed to run the game by the rules helps that along. And I'm not sure that it's entirely the system that did that for us, but some of it might just be that we haven't played in a month and a half, 2 months, 3 months, something like that, right? There's been a long time between sessions, so that might also contribute to it. But anyway, I just wanted to comment on that I it felt very much like the way that sort of situation would play itself out in a comic book, issue to issue. So again, okay, that does wrap up my reflections on issue number 5. Thank you so much for watching. If you stayed till the end, I wish you good health, I wish you good cheer, and I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.